But I would like to start by acknowledging the custodians of the land upon which you and I, Nyadol, are meeting on respectively. I'm here on the lands of the Boonwurrung people, and I want to pay my respects, obviously, to their elders past and present. You know, the oldest living culture in the world continues as ever, strong, resilient and proud. I think one of the greatest achievements, in my view, of the Alliance has been the development and implementation of our Reconciliation Action Plan, and a real recognition of the need for an organisation like ours to address the long-standing untruths and lies about the history of this country. And of course, the need to really take a closer look and scrutinise what the relationship looks like between multicultural Australia and the First Nations people of this land. It gives me great pleasure, Nyadol, to be able to have this conversation with you, because in effect, I'm handing over the reins, and I simply cannot imagine anyone else more dynamic, more outspoken, more committed to social justice, driven, I think, by an absolute dedication to ensuring that the diverse voices of women across this country are heard loud and clear in areas that really matter. Nyadol, Nyuon, can I hand it over to you to tell us, as the new chair of the Harmony Alliance, a little bit more about you, and then let's have a conversation about the vision that you anticipate for this great organisation. I'm so excited and so proud. But for those out there that don't know you, tell us a little bit about the new chair of the Harmony Alliance.
Oh, well, I should also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm in, and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and commit to continuing to learn more about the history and survival of Indigenous peoples of this country. In terms of my own background, I came here in 2005. I was an 18-year-old girl, very ready to take as many opportunities as I can get in my new home. I was desperate to, first of all, get to school, and so I enrolled in high school and get a tertiary education, which I was lucky to do, and then went to Melbourne Uni and did a Bachelor of Arts and start practicing law. And it was a journey that I've had tremendous luck, I think, to have come across people within the law. And of course, Maria, you've played such a big part in my life. The drives to conferences, the conversations we've had at cafes, you know, you've played a role, not just of an older sister in some ways, but a great mentor, you know, someone who's willing to see you in your many dimensions, and also see you into places that you don't see yourself at all. I mean, to take up this challenge was because you suggested it. It never occurred to me that I would be, you know, be prepared to take it. It didn't occur to me at all, and it came to me as a surprise when you mentioned it. But, you know, thinking more about it and your reasons for it, and the idea that we need to be able to transition leaderships between not only different groups, but, sorry, Maria, I've just, not only different groups, but between different generations of immigrants too. And so it's been an interesting challenge to take on. And I'm really looking forward to working with a committed group of women within the organization itself, and connecting to broader groups of women outside the organization, and try to see how we can make this organization, which is already even greater.
Yeah. When we first started a few years ago now, the Harmony Alliance was very much about building a solid foundation ensuring that those voices that are often so marginalised or don't gain access, that we created opportunities to enable the integration of those views, those narratives, so important. But as you well know, this is a terrain that's ever changing. The discourse, the kinds of conversations that we've had, I think, have been really important, and at times really difficult. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping is continued is the nature of those conversations, where I think we need to be frank and honest with each other as women. We need to recognise that we do speak from varying positions of power, that some of us need to recognise the privilege that might accrue, that perhaps wasn't there at the very outset of our migration stories, but over the years, for a number of reasons, that privilege becomes more and more apparent. And of course, for me, the importance of then using that privilege to create and enable opportunities for other voices to come through and to take up that leadership has become very important. But I would hope, Nyadol, that we don't lose the honesty, I think, the ability to truth tell. And one of those starting points for me has to be the ongoing conversation that we're having with First Nations women. How do you anticipate that conversation into the future? What are the sorts of things that you'd like to see happen with the Harmony Alliance under your leadership in relation to building some of that foundational stuff that we've started with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sister organisations?
Well, the first and always the most important thing is to continue to listen to what First Nation people are saying about their issues and how they want those issues to be dealt with. And to understand our role so much as solidarity with them and assisting those communities to push for the changes that they want. Because I do think that we do exist in a very complicated space as migrant women who come here into a country with a long history of Indigenous people's struggles. And I'm quite aware also that not in addition to accumulated privilege that you might get by being here and not being a First Nation person, there is also just the advantage of never having to have suffered and survived the history of genocide and dispossession. And so we come into a system that has denied one group of people a way of living in their culture, but that which has, to some of us, for example, to me as a refugee, rescued you into a country and given you a space. But that space exists within a hierarchy of people and priorities. And even if we shy away as people as now and claim that we are all equal, the truth of the matter is that we are not equal if we see the way we prioritize needs and in history. The history that is prioritized, the needs that are prioritized quite clearly don't take into account the interests of Indigenous people. Just for example, the struggle to have the voice of Indigenous people enshrined in the Constitution is a clear. So I always think our role is to really listen to what First Nation peoples are saying, and then take up the space that they offer for us to assist them to push those goals. Because for them to be attained, it's going to need a collaborative effort. And there is a lot of work that we have to do within our own communities, including addressing some of the stereotypes and discriminatory attitudes that might exist even within migrants communities, against Indigenous people. And also being aware of our role in perpetuating oppression or taking up spaces. For example, in the space about issues of discrimination and racism, the conversation can not only be about racism that occurs to African or Black immigrants. It must always be the history of discrimination against Indigenous people. That's where the conversation should start. And it's important that people like me or other women of color in these spaces know when to keep quiet, know when to step away, and know when to say no to these platforms that amplifies our voices without even a conscious turning to what Indigenous stories have to say. So I hope that moving forward, what can we achieve? It's always, maintaining a respectful relationship with First Nation people. One that is aware of our own privilege and willing to learn in our ability to be good allies.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it, Nyadol? You've touched on some of this in the past, increasingly, and I think this emerged very much from the Black Lives Matter. Not that, of course, these dialogues haven't been going on for so long, but it's interesting how the Black Lives Matter movement really captured a moment, I think, in history, and has really reiterated the urgency of the need for us to address that relationship. But some of the other issues that I think it's also brought up is the need to take a closer look, to self-reflect and identify within our own organisations the extent to which the rhetoric is indeed real, the extent to which the rhetoric is practiced. From a representational perspective, I think the Harmony Alliance and organisations like ours have always struggled to look at this idea of privilege and power between women. What do you think it might look like as we take that forward and recognise that to a large extent things are moving and changing, and that those voices need to be more representational of some of the movements that are taking place out there? Any thoughts or reflections on how we might, as we move into this more, I think, self-aware phase, how might we ensure that the voices of the diversity of women out there is adequately captured and represented?
I think as women, because we are always in a minority, or even if not minority in numbers, minority in representation in power structures, whether it's in politics or in the media. I think by that we always assume that because women are a minority, that they have no capability of intersectional oppression, if you could term it like that. And self-reflection allow us to see where we can play a significant part in oppressing women, that women themselves can oppress each other. It was there from the origin of the feminist movement, the suffrage movement, that saw women only as white women and did not contemplate the needs of African American women who also deem themselves women, just women who happen to be Black. So I think it's important that our self-reflection doesn't only rely, end with just self-reflection. It has to involve a level of action. But I do think that whatever actions would be taken will have to be framed by Indigenous peoples themselves, and that's the first thing. So our participation is to push for those things that have been framed by Indigenous and First Nations people. In terms of our own, because I think there's a relationship between migrant women as a whole and First Nation women and First Nation people. And then I think there's the conversation which also need to occur within migrant groups themselves, migrant women themselves. So the questions which you and I have explored has been, the difference between accumulative privilege of women who came here in the 1950s and 40s, who now see themselves as some of them as member of parliament and are running a lot of the migrant women organizations, and the new emergence of women that are coming in as refugees from Afghanistan and South Sudan and Iraq and other places. And so the question is, how do we all occupy this space while allowing certain transitions to occur that is able to bring up the voice from the grassroots into the mainstream conversations that we have as migrant women? And I think part of what we are doing here is practicing that. The transition between you and I, even on this space of the chairmanship, is really a conversation about that. It's practically that conversation occurring. How do we transition and bring new voices? And I hope that's the first thing that I'll be able to focus on when I come into Harmony Alliance, is to have more grassroots women from new and emerging community becoming active members of the organization. And it would mean really going to their meetings, going to their community events and inviting them to be members of the organization, and including their representatives in some of the actions and the tasks that we take forward, because that's what we need. We need to be bringing in more women in and strengthening those women voices, and a clear target as well as to how do we involve younger women, because the issues that are faced by older women who by virtue of age and experience can sometimes occupy most of the powerful places available to women. Younger women voices do not necessarily get heard most of the time, and it's a critical thing that we hear them, because if we don't, we can be misguided into what we think are the main issues affecting migrant women. And it's an example is the conversation around domestic violence. The way domestic violence present for, say, older women in relationships that are much more rigid, you know, or at least still very conservative, is quite different to the younger group that have now, relationships have become more flexible, but domestic violence and power structures still exist. So how domestic violence present in those groups, likely more to be psychological, likely more to be coercive control, and probably financial abuse and psychological abuse. Whereas in some group, it's much more likely to be, say, physical violence. And so if we focus and not pay attention to the intergenerational differences and how problems also change because of time and generation, then our focus, our priority can really be skewed towards addressing the needs of one group. So another thing we've been trying to get an active arm of the Harmony Alliance being the engagement of younger women. I might throw it back to you before I...
Yeah, and Nyadol, I think also the importance of ensuring that perhaps groups that also tend to be marginalised or in some cases completely silenced groups, sisters from the LGBTIQ+ communities. I think it's an important sort of conversation that I think our intersectionality framework that we adopted earlier this year, and then of course had a series of webinars, you were involved in some of those. I think there's a real recognition that we can't rely on this assumption of unity or homogeneity as if it just happens by accident. It obviously takes a willingness to have those difficult conversations, a willingness to let go of some of the power perhaps that we've tried to sort of hold on to, and a genuine commitment to seeing that equality in all its many facets is realised through that process of honest and open conversation and action. As you say, we can't be locked into endless narratives and discussions. We've obviously got to move to the point where we are acting on some of these important priorities. For you though, what do you anticipate given the current environment with COVID, which has obviously completely changed the nature of what life looks like at the moment, but 3 core priority areas that you'd like to see the Alliance really focused on in the next 12 months, the next 18 months and so on? What might they be for you?
Well, the first is what we discussed previously, which was getting much more being connected to the grassroots women organization and having an increased presence of young women voices in the Alliance. The second is the other end of this issue, which is to get more institutions involved with the Alliance, and that include universities and you know, even government departments and other stakeholders. And the idea is that we use that relationship to be able to work collaboratively on things that the institutions might be working on. Some universities do significant research on certain areas, and we do have those partnerships going on with places like Monash University now running the survey. So kind of creating those spaces and working more collaboratively, identifying places where we can really work in collaboration and tap into existing resources that exist and take advantage of them, but also using that relationship to identify gaps in where certain research needs to be focused, or where certain pilot projects might be run, or where we can encourage governments or departments to see that there is a space that they're not addressing that falls within their power of their frame, and that they should be willing to take that challenge on. And our job might be even to assist them to see how you can formulate that to address the particular challenge. And one of the gap, and I think I've mentioned with you that I think exists, is that there's a lot of research being done about access to justice. And a lot of conversation about access to justice, but really not a lot of action to address it. And I think that identify gaps in that they need to exist, in my view. You know, a migrant women legal center that is able to take in this research and begin to actually output some activities and programs to address the gap, so that we're not just collecting reports, but we're doing something about it in the long run. The third part is that we need to sort of look at the long term and begin the process of transitioning migrant women into the digital world. And so digital literacy is an emerging area that a lot of companies and a lot of organizations are identifying, but it's still not a core issue being addressed. We're still addressing financial literacy, sometimes even just basic literacy and numeracy issues. But we also, I think, need to start building in the challenge of the future, which is how do we get migrant women to be digitally literate and to be able to function in the world of tomorrow. So those are the kind of spaces that I would like to focus on.
You might start with me. I think my level of digital literacy, I often equate to being a dinosaur, really. I think I'm still at that stage, but having to learn very, very quickly. Nyadol, I just, in coming to an end with this conversation, and certainly not the end of our ongoing conversations into the future, because I consider you a very dear and close friend and someone I hope we can continue to sort of talk to on a daily basis. But if for anyone out there who might be wondering about the value or the impact of an organisation like Harmony, what do you think the impact is or could be of an organisation like ours, particularly now, I think? Any ideas on what you might say to someone who questions the need for a standalone migrant and refugee women's organisation like ours? And sadly, it's still often heard in various feminist networks, can I say, that we need a more integrated approach, that standalone organisations like ours can be potentially divisive. I would argue that in fact they provide an important bridge, an important opportunity to build that coalition and allyship with other sister organisations. But what would be the true value or impact, do you think, of an organisation like ours? How would you describe it?
I think the organization existence is a fundamental truth. We're different. Women are not, we're not a homogeneous, we don't have all the same problems. And power doesn't tend to necessarily fall in the hands of people. An organization like Harmony Alliance exists to challenge those conversations and say that there is a space, and there must be a space, for the particular experiences of women from migrant groups. And so if someone thinks that these are not important, nothing as less important as not being heard, because not being heard means that you do not exist in certain spaces at all. And policies and programs can be put in place without a thought to how they can impact you or people in your community. And I could give an example. A lot of government organizations now are transitioning their services online. They're leaving a large group of women who are not literate in terms of digital literacy, completely out of touch with fundamental system. And now if you think about what COVID-19 has done, which is almost all of it overnight, transform our whole world into existing online spaces, you can imagine the disadvantage that many of these women would face if we do not cater for a different way of allowing them access. So I think organizations like this do not exist to exacerbate division. Divisions already exist because we have different problems. And I think when it's termed in that way, we are looking for comfort. And there is no comfort in these spaces. There's no comfort in the difficult conversations and the honest conversations that we might have. We have to be uncomfortable, to be able to grow and to realize what other people are going through. Comfort means that we have established a level of equality. And I don't think any of us can say we've reached there yet, that we've reached a point where all of us have equal access and equal opportunity to the kind of life that we claim is the ideal life that a country like Australia offers. And so I think that organizations like this exist specific for that, to be part of the conversation and to ensure that when governments and institutions and those in power are looking around for solutions, that among the solutions, our voice is present. And it's forming part of the knowledge that can build the future of this country.
Nyadol, you give me great hope that there is a future out there that is as inclusive and as just as the vision that you've just characterized or outlined in the conversation that we have. I have no doubts that Harmony Alliance is in excellent hands. Can I just say in closing that I hope I can continue to provide support, that I can continue to be a friend and an ally to the work that you are doing, continue to do. And as a fan of Arundhati Roy, I always resort back to this particular quote, but in this instance, I think it really rings true, given your capacity, your potential, your exciting inspiration that you provide. She says another world is not only possible, she is on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. Nyadol, I hear you breathing. I hear you shouting. I hear your voice, one that has captured the thoughts and hearts of so many. It gives me great pride, so much pride, to be able to hand the reins over and anticipate the ongoing dramatic impact that Harmony Alliance will bring on the lives of so many migrant and refugee sisters out there. Thank you so much, Nyadol.
Thank you, Maria. And if I could just say, there is no way I am letting you go. I will always expect the phone calls and the telephone conversations about a variety of things, including being a honorary auntie to my little kids. So you're not going anywhere.
Good. And I would hope that I don't. Thanks again, Nyadol.